just so you know, at Exceptional Individuals, we support everyone all under the spectrum from dyslexia all the way to ADHD, and Irlen syndrome does come under that. It's normally associated with dyslexia. However, you can have it and not have dyslexia. So we're going to be looking at the relationship between how this kind of coexists with the others. ADHD and autism are another one which closely aligns. Okay, and this is a bit about us. Hopefully most of you know now, but we support neurodiverse individuals in the UK, though we do support everywhere else as well, but we are based in London. And I always like to start off with, what do we mean by being neurodivergent? Neurodivergent is the fluctuation of ability. So it's about having some things where you're exceptionally skilled at and other things where you challenge more than the average person. And with Irlen syndrome, it's exactly that. Sometimes it might seem that your grades are low, your behavior is challenging, but yet that doesn't affect your intelligence whatsoever. You can have this and still be extremely intelligent. So just remember, this isn't about focusing on negatives. It's about appreciating the challenges, but also understanding that there are strengths attached to them. So Meares-Irlen syndrome, it goes back not that long ago, actually, I think like 60s. And there was some research done on visual stress. And then Irlen, who is the key person in this, started doing more research and found out that with different colored overlays and different visual stress minimizers, it can actually relieve some of the symptoms and characteristics. And I think what was quite interesting about it is this dyslexia or is this to do with vision? Well, neither. So a lot of people think it's about having poor eyes because a lot of people also wear glasses when not at all. With eyes, it's about it's about, like, you know, the retina and the curvature of your eye, but this is all about in the brain and how the brain processes information. A lot of people who have dyslexia will not have this, but also are more likely to have it as well. So we'll go into a bit more detail exactly when people are diagnosing for this, what are they looking for? And also, how do you rule out that it's not something else? Like, how do you know it's not to do with your actual eye? Or how do you know it's not just dyslexia or autism, just misdiagnosed? It also gets called scleroptic sensitivity syndrome and visual stress. So visual stress is more of like the umbrella term, but you can have everyone gets visual stress. It's like everyone gets depressed, but not everyone has depression. So just know there is a difference between those two. It's a perceptual processing disorder. That's basically saying it's not due to having poor eyesight. It's how the brain interprets the information and how it's able to read it. So remember, it's to do with how the brain processes and not to do with vision. It's not an optical problem. I can't stress that enough. But though it's not an optical problem, you definitely should go to your optician first before looking into this as an option, because again, some people get confused. An optician cannot diagnose this, but it's also very possible that you might have poor eyesight and Irlen syndrome. Timmer says, one of those I have worked with, the process MIS, and described it as reading in the making sense of rich or on a chalkboard, i.e. making visual sense of things can be like guessing. I think that's a really good way of putting it. And sorry, I butchered it while pronouncing. The problem tends to run in family. Standardized education and medical tests do not currently identify it. So though there's a lot of research on it, if you go to most practitioners, they will not recognize it, or it's not kind of across the board. The NHS can kind of recommend you to go get a diagnosis, but it's not common at all. Oh, Chantal says, I have been seeing more Specsavers offering tests for visual stress and offering tinted lenses. It's a way cheaper than going for an Irlen syndrome test, where things like Specsavers, I would say it's no harm in trying them out first. A lot of these things, it's a little bit anecdotal. So if it works for you, amazing. If not, go look for further support. So in short, see it more as you're like budget friendly, maybe less specialized, but depending how bad some of the symptoms are affecting you. Okay, my first question I want to ask you to find out whether or not you may possibly have Irlen syndrome is, what type of lights do you find most comfortable? Are you okay with incandescent, so your basic light, fluorescent, LEDs, which are, like types of things you might have on like little devices, or natural light like sunlight? Tim says visual stress is an aspect of Irlen syndrome. However, you can have visual stress, i.e. dyslexia, but not scleropic sensitivity, weakness to light. Yeah, absolutely. This is why they are different. There's many dyslexics who do not struggle with light sensitivity. So interestingly, most of us find natural light the most comfortable. And it makes sense because our eyes have evolved to process natural light. Yet when it comes to other artificial lights, it can be less comfortable. So your standard light, your incandescent, sorry about that one, most people will find okay. LEDs, we don't normally have to look at them as much, particularly with our computer monitors. That's mainly what we're looking at. But the one that most people find difficult is fluorescent. And those are like the real tall, long ones that we get in office blocks. It normally comes down to the frequency, or like the rapid rate that the light is switching on and off. So how fast the rate is. And those are the ones which most people might struggle with. So for example, on a day-to-day basis, you might not have any visual stress, but in an office place or in a shopping center, that's where the stress may kick in. And Tim mentions it's blue light versus white light. If you've ever heard of the blue light, it's not actually blue, but it's a type of light that is emitted from your phones and your computer, which does cause distress. And when you get different lenses, they can block out that ray, and it can also tint the color, which can make it less contrast. But some other areas that it may affect you, apart from visual stress, is academic and work performance. If you're getting more fatigued because of the strain on your eyes, it's naturally going to affect a whole range of areas. Behavior. This is more in children. That again, if they are struggling in an area, they naturally act up. Attention, you can kind of see how these all fit in. And a lot of these things happen as a result of, not because of, the ability to sit still and concentration. You might notice that a lot of these have a focus on children, and like most neurodivergents, they tend to get picked up as children, and research in adults is severely lacking. That's why it's always great to get your first-hand experiences. Do you see glare from bright objects when others do not? Now, it's important to know we all see glare. Glare is a very normal part. But do you see it more often than others? Predominantly maybe when you're driving a car, when you're out at night in the street lights. Does that kind of like halo effect become so severe that it's very disorientating and potentially dangerous? So if you said yes, that's one of the biggest characteristics of Irlen syndrome. And you've got to be careful though, because this can also be something to do with the curvature of your eye. So those who have had like laser surgery also struggle with glare. But just remember that with this one, it's about how the brain processes information, not about how the actual lens of the eye. How do you know those difference? That's a bit more trickier, and that's why you then need to go to a specialist. So going to your optician first can normally roll out whether it's to do with your eye, and if they find nothing wrong with it, that's when you might want to look at Irlen syndrome. Chantel says, take naps when you're starting to see the effects of Irlen syndrome is the best way to end the headaches or irritation, then faster for me. Yeah, I think naps are a key. I take naps like every day. I love them. It can kind of like reset the brain. I feel like it's just like looking at things chips away at it continuously. If you suffer from any of the following, Irlen syndrome might be your problem. These are just some of them, because we always think it's just about struggling to read things, but actually it can affect a lot. Maybe when you're looking at print, it doesn't always look very consistent. The environment looks different. So maybe some days things look overly saturated or really dark, and you think, well, this doesn't seem right. slow or if reading, eye strain, fatigue, headaches. Maybe you struggle looking at boards and having to copy down on paper. I really struggle to tell the difference. Like whiteboards, for example, because of the shininess and the contrast, can be really different for people with visual stress. Sanjana says, I've always had anti-glare glasses and anti-glare laptop screens are better for me. Yeah, I'm the same. Mine sometimes gleam because of that special layer, and it really does help. I've always found my eyes to be more sensitive than the average person. Do you wear any of these? So either glasses, do you wear contacts, sunglasses indoor, or none of them? Okay, oh, some wear glasses indoors. A bit of a stigma to that, but we'll get through that. Glasses, nice. And again, just because you wear glasses doesn't mean that you naturally have Irlen syndrome. It's something which, if you could have perfect 20/20 vision, no trouble whatsoever, and still require glasses, because Irlen syndrome is about the light that is able to filter through and the color. And this is why you can also wear contacts. You can get special contacts that are tinted. You do have to go to a specialist for those, however. Sunglasses aren't naturally going to help. They might relieve some of the pressure, but all they are doing is reducing the amount of light. They're not necessarily blocking a certain type of light. This is why having ones that block blue light, for example, might be beneficial, whereas sunglasses wouldn't. So yeah, just because you don't wear glasses doesn't mean that you might not still have Irlen syndrome, and vice versa. Now, I want you to rank what gives you the headaches in the shortest amount of time. So for instance, if you find watching TV gives you a headache within like a few minutes, put it to number 1. If you find supermarket lighting barely an inconvenience, leave that at number 4. And I hope you appreciate a little picture of Psyduck. He's a cheeky Pokemon who always has a headache. And depending on these, not one or the other makes you more likely or less likely to have Irlen syndrome. All of these are very common things which can affect headaches. But typically, it's about the intensity of the light that can bring headaches on faster. So most people, for example, would find supermarket lighting very distracting. I'm sure we've all been in like special health and beauty shops, and sometimes Boots, other ones are more specialized, and they're just blinding. It's just so bright. And they do it as a way to make you feel that it's cleanliness, it's clean, it's modern, but actually it's extremely unnatural, and our eyes hadn't actually evolved to process that light in a comfortable way. Computers are another one, but the reason why a lot of us get headaches on computers is our eyes naturally blink. But when we're looking at a computer screen, for some reason our eyes do not blink as much as they should do, and thus our eyes get drier, and then strain increases, and then headaches happen. So being able to differentiate the difference between what is Irlen syndrome and what is just standard fatigue can be a challenge. Okay, Chantel says, do you know who offers these tinted lenses or where someone can get them? Going on like the direct website for Irlen syndrome, I think it's just irlen.com, or there's another one like irlen.org is probably your best bet. I know that they are very specialized, and if you want ones which are just tinted, I think that's not so difficult to find. But if you want ones that also have a prescription in it and tinted, that might be very expensive. So just kind of bear that in mind. But short answer, no, I don't know. I know they're available, but I know that depending, if you have multiple things going on, might be a challenge. It's not unheard of that people will wear the contact lenses which change the color and their prescription glasses on top, or might have the prescription contact lenses and have the tinted lenses on top. Though, let's face it, if you're wearing contacts, it's normally because you don't actually want to wear glasses. So that might not be the best solution for you. When judging distance, do any of the following affect you? And this is where dyspraxia and Irlen syndrome can kind of like cross paths a little bit. So do you often get called clumsy, Are you accident prone? Do you always bump into things? Do you find activity sports and catching a ball difficult? This sounds a lot like dyspraxia, but it's not, because dyspraxia is about how the brain processes information slightly at a delayed response. So it's got all this information and it's taking a little bit longer to kind of sort it all out. But with Irlen syndrome, though it's the same results, the way that the brain gets to it is very different. And it's about, with the glare or the strain on your eyes, it can cause just a slowness in response. So being clumsy, being accident prone is a very common thing. And this is why, wearing glasses outdoor can be very beneficial. But if you're hypersensitive to strain or types of light, this is why wearing lenses or glasses or sunglasses can be really beneficial. So yeah, similar to dyspraxia, but they're not the same thing. And as you'll notice, I'll say there's a lot of things that are very similar, but not the same thing. And this does mean that there is a high increase of wrong diagnosis. So if you aren't convinced that if you've been diagnosed with something, that it is correct, or some of the support mechanisms which typically help someone, say, with dyspraxia, isn't benefiting you, then it might be a good opportunity to look at other things that could have got mixed up in the crosswires. But then I suppose ultimately we have to trust the professionals, but that doesn't mean that you aren't able to probe a bit deeper, or at least ask them, have you heard of this? Have you thought about it? Next question is, do you miss out words or lose your place when reading? This one closely relates to dyslexia, but as you'll see the pattern, doesn't mean that it's automatically associated. So either rarely, sometimes, frequently, almost always. People with Irlen syndrome can find words kind of pulsate, they can find things blur together, move around, very similar to how a lot of people think dyslexia operates, but doesn't. So yeah, if it's just sometimes, then you probably don't have it. We all miss out words from time to time. But if it's frequently, that is very common. I'm glad not many of you have put almost always, because the fact is with Irlen syndrome, it's normally about the environment you are in to how much it affects you. So if you're not always going to be in the same lighting conditions. So frequently does seem the most realistic one for those who do struggle with visual stress. We got, do you know if the colored tints that people change as they get older? I'm starting to feel like they worked for me when I was 7, but not as perfect as it once was. That's a really good question. And honestly, I don't know. It's definitely possible that as your brain can change and different colors might be more beneficial over time. I suppose it might not be too dissimilar to with glasses, like your eyes can better or worsen. But as to not how effective you find them, I'm not sure on that, but it's definitely possible. Okay, next, Mr. Men, because who doesn't love a bit of fun? Visual discrimination. Using the annotation tool or the zoom, spot the difference. So feel free to put a pin on it or just say what the difference is. And this can be very difficult for people with visual distress to kind of look at images side by side and be able to notice the key differences. And it's because the brain just kind of blurs it together, or when it sees the colors, it doesn't process it correctly, or it kind of just disregards certain amounts of information. To be honest, it took me quite a time. Yeah, we got, okay, April's found some. Yes, okay, cool. Here you've got the orange and the red. That might be quite difficult. But yeah, orange and blue, a lot easier to notice. Next one is, do you confuse any of these letters/numbers? So these are very common letters and numbers that people with dyslexia typically confuse. But it can also affect in terms of visual stress because of how similar that the letters look. So G, Q, I1, B, D, T, I, G6. This is just a small selection, but obviously anything which can look similar. And with dyslexia, it's about again, the brain looking at it and kind of confusing the view, and very, very similar with Irlen syndrome. And this is why things like the dyslexia font, which research, if you haven't seen it, some people find useful, because what it is that every letter is weighted at the bottom, so it looks very different. So if you struggle with kind of confusing letters, try and find a font which is very unique. So every individual letter or number has its own characteristics, rather than ones that, easily misinterpreted. Personally, I don't really like the Dyslexia font, but I think it's very personal and individual. For me, I think I find Helvetica the easiest, but I think it's, as long as you don't pick Comic Sans, I think you're good. Ooh, okay. Now I want you all to try and read this. Yes, Joanne's like, no chance. Not happening. And unfortunately, for those who have visual stress or Irlen syndrome, reading like this in certain light conditions can be really challenging. One, because it might be due to the background being white and the contrast is kind of dazzling and creates that blur or those halo effects. Or it could just be that the letters are too close together and the font isn't easy. So some people, just by having different colored fonts, different colored tints, can improve this. One thing which is a very common misunderstanding is that dyslexics or people with visual stress love the color yellow. Just by putting a yellow tint over it will automatically fix it. And no, that is not the case. Yes, it is the most common color by far in terms of alleviating some of that strain, but that doesn't mean it's a one size fits all. It could be blue, it could be dark blue, it could be magenta. Sometimes we have a little testing kit at Exceptional Individuals, and one might not be enough. So we might put blue or we might put a red on top of it, and that might create just the right color, which can make it easier to read. I think I can read this though. Visual processing is characterized by difficulties understanding written symbols, including the symbols, and I can roughly read it. That's probably because I spent most of my life not being able to see clearly because I didn't realize I needed glasses, but there we are. I, however, still do experience headaches, even though I've got the correct prescription. And that was something which I found very frustrating, going time and time to the optician saying, I can't see properly. And they're saying, your eyes are fine though. And had I have not known about visual stress, which is something that not all opticians test for, I probably would still be in a very poor situation and spend hundreds and hundreds on the opticians, even though there's no amount of money would have been able to fix that had I just looked at the optical side of things. So here I want you to look at it and write down the mistake. If any of you have attended a previous webinar on dyslexia, you may recognize this one because there is a lot of overlap. So on this, can you find the mistake? Now you're probably looking at all the colors, thinking which one's different. And if we go down, the is written twice. Yes, if you got that, congratulations. So if you see, can you find the mistake? And if you are always looking at something you're not kind of expecting, then a lot of difficulties can arise. Now, these are just some statements, and I just want to find out, do you resonate with them? Do your eyes get red and watery? And obviously, this happens to all of us, but we're talking about frequently. And does it get to a point where it causes irritation or potential difficulties with navigating the world? I have seen this so many times and it gets to me every time. Yeah, I do love a good puzzle. Does reading make you tired? Do you blink or squint a lot? Do you use fingers or other markers, when you're kind of like following things? Do you get restless, active, or fidgety when reading? So all of these, if you experience more than one of these, then that's definitely an indication of Irlen characteristics. But if it's just one, and if it's just now and then that's just the normal human condition. Because one of the things which I've always got to be mindful when we do these types of talks is that people will always resonate with everything you say because we experience everything. But typically, we diagnose disabilities in terms of the severity on, does it affect your life in a significant way? And does it affect it for 12 months or more? So keep that in mind. If it's just every now and then, maybe not. So a lot of you do tend to blink or squint a lot. And yeah, that might, if you blink or squint on a sunny day more than your peers or friends, that might be because you have an added sensitivity. It's also all of these are very common, to be fair. And this one is, how many black dots are there? None. Yes. The correct answer is 0. But which of these suggested shapes share a feature with the given shape? And if you do not have visual strain, you might find this relatively easy. Okay, interestingly, we've got 50 for H and that. So the correct answer for this one would be T. And the simple reason is these all have one line of symmetry, where H has 2 and T only has 1. Now that was a bit of a puzzle to trick you up, but the general idea is the same, because imagine you have a bit of a halo or the words move around. You might find it quite difficult to work out symmetry or be able to answer the question, because what you're seeing isn't what the question asker had intended. So just to summarize on a few other characteristics that we missed out on today, is strain or fatigue from computer use, difficulties reading music. This is because the lines are very close together and can be easily misinterpreted. This you're not going to notice unless you play a musical instrument, that you might find it more difficult than others. Sloppy, careless math errors. So yeah, similar to dyscalculia, which is the maths version of dyslexia in some ways, it can also affect maths. But this is how the brain looks at the images, processes the information, and it processed it in a non-intended way, thus mistakes. Misaligned numbers and columns. Have you ever been on an Excel document and you keep getting the wrong answer because the lines blur together or the columns kind of move? Unfortunately, I experience this one a lot of the time. Ineffective use of study time. Maybe you just procrastinate a lot, because let's say if something is uncomfortable and you're having to do it all the time, you're going to do everything you possibly can to avoid doing that. Lack of motivation, very similar to the last point. It's not an inherent part of Irlen syndrome, but again, if you're finding something difficult, non-stop, and kind of painful, then you are going to lose motivation in order to keep trying that same thing. And your grades do not reflect the amount of effort. This is basically saying, you know you're a smart cookie, but the grades aren't reflecting your general intelligence. And this is because the question that you're seeing or what you're reading doesn't make sense. If it made sense, and if you could see it clearly, you'd probably get the right answer. But in its current blurry, jiggity-jaggedy, wobbly-woo way, you're not going to get it. So our top tips is keep it simple and reduce visual distractions. So maybe you've got your computer desk up. If you've got lots of things in the background, try to move them. So when you have foreground, midground, background, try to reduce it to as minimal as possible, so the eye doesn't have to keep refocusing on different levels. Print on colored or textured paper. Quite often, just a paper that isn't white. Recycled paper is great for this. Or yellow paper, brown paper. Just try and print on things which aren't completely white, because they can be very distracting. You can also ask a lot of people in schools and colleges to print on larger print as well as colored print if you ask. Adjust your device screen and optimize display settings. So as I mentioned, on your phone, there are a lot of apps which purposely can allow you to choose a dark setting, or you can actually change the contrast. Go on your accessibility settings. If you are struggling with them, always get in contact and we can help you out. Consider audiobooks for longer reading. It doesn't mean that you can't read. It doesn't mean that you're cheating, but there's a really good thing on Amazon. I think they call it Whisper Read or something along the lines of Whisper, where you can be reading and then you can put your headphones in and it automatically syncs up. So you're never kind of like out of sync. So I always buy the physical book and the audiobook, because for me, that allows me to keep concentration a lot more easier and also kind of dip in between the two. Because some days I actually want to physically read. I don't want audiobooks, but not always the case. Would love to know if you have any tips. And use color tints. There's different ones you can get. I got one that's just like a thin strip, which I can put in my like bag for everywhere I go. And they also have like a little line, or you can get ones that are like full pages. But I really, really, really recommend is trying as many different colors as you can before choosing one. Just because the shop only sells blue or yellow doesn't mean that's going to be the color that helps you the most. Schools are also an issue for that. But if any of you are struggling with these visual strains in the workplace in particular, you can get in contact with exceptional individuals, because I mention it every single webinar, but through Access to Work, you are allowed to get support for Irlen syndrome and visual stress. So for instance, they can get special software that changes the tint of your screen. They could get a monitor that has a higher refresh rate, so it's less flickering. They can get like, they can't get special glasses. I think they can get items and coaching and mentoring, but what they cannot get is the assessment. So just keep that in mind. If you want the assessment, you'd have to go private. But if you want some of the things that can help you in the day-to-day work setting, that's where they normally can help. Chantel says, use sunglasses frames when you get your tinted lenses. This blocks out way more light and looks better because sunglasses frames are designed for tinted lenses and to block out light. Great top tip. Tim says, example is somewhat regional, but I have heard good things and may at least provide further information. Thanks, Tim. Irlen Northeast. Yes, I was looking at them today, actually. They got some good YouTube videos. And if you wanted to catch up today, you came late or maybe missed a bit or want to watch previous ones, head over to our YouTube channels. You can just click on the link and you can catch up, like and subscribe. Now, if you have any questions on this, let me know and I'll do my best to answer. If not, I'm sure Tim will be able to support. Not all professionals agree that Irlen syndrome is its own separate condition. Some think it is just a misdiagnosis of dyslexic or ADHD characteristics. Others see it as something which requires more research. However, does it really matter if you find that the things that help it or claim to help it helps you? So Irlen syndrome, bit of debate, but Irlen method, which is about different colored overlays to reduce stress, has been proven to support a lot of people. I think one of the best methods we can always say is if it feels right for you and if you notice improvements, then that's all the proof you need. At Exceptional Individuals, we're not very big on requesting diagnosis or proof, because ultimately a bit of paper doesn't prove whether or not something would help you or not. So try things out. And if it works for you, you can get tested. If any of you are ever in London, once we're back open, Tim has this really good kind of kit, which has all the different colors. And I'm sure if we have time, we'd be more than happy to do a little test with you to find out which ones would work, to save you paying out any money before you've realized whether or not they work. Yeah, and Tim has made it very clear they will not pay for the examination. And unfortunately, we have tried and it has never worked to our success. If you want to get in contact, if you have any questions, if you're interested about trying some overlays, try before you buy, then you can always contact us at admin@accept.co.uk or go onto our main thing and request a one-to-one. So yeah, I hope you found that interesting today and learn a little bit more about some of the characteristics and symptoms. But I would always say try and rule out an eye condition first, like poor vision, then rule out dyslexia or ADHD. And then if those are still not the key issue, then I would say look at Irlen syndrome. But remember, it's very common to have multiple conditions co-occurring or comorbidity. All right, well, I'm going to let you all go and enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you for attending, everyone. Always great to see familiar faces as well as new attendees. And just drop me a message if you have any further questions or have something that you didn't feel comfortable to ask today.